learners, welcome to the MOOC course Society and Media. In this module, we will discuss caste, class and identity, media projection on the issues of marginality. The content of this module is created by Mr. Siddharth Verma, research scholar Guru Govind Singh, Indraprastha University, Delhi. And my name is Professor Minal Pareek from Sister Nivedita University, Kolkata. The learning outcome of the course are to explore and understand how the media represents the socio-political factors of marginalized communities in India, to analyze the mainstream media narratives, to identify biases, stereotypes and exclusion in the media and film ecosystem, to advocate and practice sensitivity towards social diversity and ethical responsibility in communication practice, to reflect upon the media consumption patterns and to act responsibly in the media practice in a professional manner. Now let's start with the introduction part of the module in media. The media in the Indian context undertakes a very crucial role in delineating the experiences of caste and class and chooses to portray which experiences are considered to be normal and which ones are categorized as marginalized. Identify is both social and personal, which is produced through the representation, discourse and repetition of narratives spread through the media scape. Caste, also known as Jati, conventionally has made access to education, land, occupation and dignity. Unfortunately, here class is often seen as prerequisite in an economic category. Its intersection with caste in the Indian context is deep and consequential. Analysis of marginality need to consider the interlinking of caste and class together in media representations. The problem is not about misinterpretation, but also about the underrepresentation. The media system only highlights the peripheral position of the marginals by depicting them only in the moments of crisis, where they can get TRP by showing emotional turmoil. This module examines the representation and voices of caste and class and identity in the journalism and Indian cinema. It focuses on showing how the media removes stereotypes and resists the narratives of marginalized. It also turns our focus on how alternative media is empowering Dalits and Adivasis and challenging to these dominant spaces. After getting the basic idea now, I will tell you about the portrayal of caste, class and identity in mainstream Indian cinema. The historical, hierarchical and caste structure plays an essential role in how the media influences while representing caste and class in cinema. Media organizations are not apart from the society, whereas they are rooted in the social hierarchies of the society that shape ownership, authorship, and access. The upper caste and economical privileged groups have a tight hold on the structures. As a result, media narratives frequently reflect dominant communities' perspectives, while the marginalized groups are represented selectively, stereotypically, or not at all. After analyzing Indian newspapers, TV, digital platforms and magazines by Oxfam India and News Laundry showed that the underrepresentation of the marginalized caste group in Indian media. Another report published by Hindu shows the upper caste group occupies 90% of the leadership positions in Indian outlets, with zero scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. The report studied around 43 Indian print, TV and digital outlets for their coverage, social location of the leadership and caste composition of journalists employed by the organization. Journalists from scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and other backward classes are majorly underrepresented in decision-making positions in media houses. This structural exclusion has an impact not only on the volume but also on the tone, depth and representation of caste and class related reports. Narrative of the marginalized are often reactive, event-based and crisis-driven, rather than analytical or historically rooted. Cinema has always played a particularly prominent role in Indian cinema culture. Its reach extends to linguistic, regional and socio-economic divides. making it an effective platform for influencing collective ideas and perceptions. If we look at the historic mainstream Indian cinema, it has avoided explicitly dealing with caste, although there were some portrayals of the caste, but it has always been shown in downtrodden people. With the woman playing the character in Sujata, a Hindi film released on 1979. But it cannot negate the fact that Indian cinema was biased when it came to caste representation, while poverty, unemployment and class exploitation were common themes. Caste as a system of social authority was mostly ignored. This exclusion enabled upper caste experiences to be portrayed as universal human experiences, while caste persecution went into non-existence. On the other hand, documentaries and alternative cinema present a more nuanced critique of caste and class. Documentaries like India Untouched, which was also shown in Satyamev Jayate in Star Plus, illustrate how untouchability still thrives in everyday necessities like water access, housing, religion, wedding, and education. By avoiding commercialization and focusing on lived experiences, such films reveal caste as a systematic condition rather than an outmoded social issue. Overall, the Indian cinema reflects larger media structures. It has historically reinforced class, caste, hierarchies, but it has also served as contestant place where these hierarchies are being challenged. As more filmmakers from marginalized communities achieve notoriety, cinematic marginal storylines will evolve from non-existence to assertion and from sympathy to resistance. Moving forward to the next part of the module, media framing and identity and construction of marginality, identity is not developed in isolation. It is shaped by repeated representation, silence and frame presented by media projection, influences on how viewers perceive social divergence, whether or not they are viewed as citizens, victims, threats, or people with agency. In India, caste and class have an impactful role in influencing these particular frames, especially with the marginalized pollution. When discussing caste, the mainstream media often rely on irregular framing. Caste violence, honor killing, and discrimination are reported as discrete incidents rather than the outcome of systematic injustices. Instead of portraying caste inequality as systematic and deeply ingrained in social structure, the media convergence gives the impression that this caste inequality is specific and regional. The framing of the marginalized distracts from the historical blame and policy failure on the part of the society. In this process, language plays a crucial and sensitive role. Terminologies like clash, dispute, or local tension are frequently used to show marginalized people instead of directly referring to the caste violences they have survived. This neutralization hides the raw power dynamics and lowers the accountability of the system, making the suffering sustain a sense of victimhood without shaping the narrative and context of Dalit and Adivasi identities. Identity is to be shaped by narratives and symbols used in popular culture and movies to show the realities, while the members of the dominant caste hold positions of complexity, ambition, and authority. The marginalized are often portrayed as being in their suffering, humiliation, or moral purity phase. This contradiction creates a tension between the space which cannot be accessible to the marginalized identities much more distant. Cultural theorists argue that identity becomes rigid and conventional when complexity is disregarded. The day-to-day representation of marginalized communities acting as the recipient rather than political actors is a major example of this. Dalit and Adivasis are mostly portrayed as recipients of the assistance rather than active agents for change, be it in news reports about welfare programs or movies about social reforms. This depiction ignores histories of resistance, such as labor struggles and anti-caste movement, while reinforcing oppressive narratives. Other devastating tools for framing marginalized is non-existence, Exclusion is normalized by media. Lack of regular depictions of marginalized lives, experiences from the middle class and upper caste predominant on screen and in headlines, giving the impression that they are the norm. On the other hand, marginalized identities reinforce social distance by appearing distinctive and exceptional. Jalwal A. and Kumawat G. in 2025 clearly point out that in Varmula's case, while the incident garnered significant media attention, much of the initial coverage failed to adequately address the role of caste-based discrimination in his death. Instead, media outlets tended to frame the issues as personal tragedy or as problem of campus politics rather than a cause of systematic caste-based violence. Both public and private perceptions are impacted by these framing techniques. Marginalized audience may internalize the same stigma if they are repeatedly exposed to these inadequate portrayals. Such images reinforce moral distance and ignorance for dominant groups. Thus, media framing is essential to the social construction of caste and class identities. After understanding the module in depth, let us discuss the alternative media and politics representation as a parallel to the mainstream media. Alternative media has been developed as progressive forum for challenging the upper caste narratives. Alternative media has evolved as a significant counter-public space which challenges the hegemonic narratives and provides space for the resistance, self-representation and democratic participation. Alternative media provides a platform and practices to incorporate which operate outside of the elite or bourgeois institutional control and highlights the voices that stereotypically and paradoxically have been excluded from the mainstream discourse. It does not look for exclusion within the existence power structure, but also actively questions and disrupts them. In this context, media has played an integral role as it is prerequisite to how communities work and is portrayed. There do exist platforms which are heeded by Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi, whose voices share daily experiences with prejudice, resistance and cultural life, and this has been taken care by the alternative media. These platforms question and look beyond definition of marginality by focusing on the real experiences above the spectacle. The politics of who to represent and whose voice should be presented in order to show the reality have also been altered by these independent film collectives. They teach the locals how to make films and write reports. In this way, they democratize media production and break the barrier of media production accessibility. They start from observation to engagement, and then the storytelling of the narratives progresses. The marginalized are now filmed by the camera from within rather than from the outside perspective. The Brahmanical power dynamics in Indian public discourse has been challenged in the large part by these Dalit media. Dalit-led media initiatives have emphasized caste as a main element of analysis, from the early Dalit periodicals like Mukh Nayak, found by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, to the modern digital platform like Dalit Camera, the Blue Pen and the Round Table India. Alternative media also serves as tool for resisting political as well as social ideology and survival for the Adivasis too. There has been an emphasis on community radio stations which cover topics like land right, forest law, health education and naming radio Bundelkhand, Radio Dhadkan and Kunjal Panchi. They broadcast in local language in order to show the inclusion of all multifaceted languages in India. These platforms give priority to the indigenous inclusion of all multi-faced languages which are often being neglected in mainstream media. Documentary films which depict raw reality have been very effective at exposing structural caste violence too. Initiatives like Dalit Camera, which documents caste realities through the eyes of individuals who live them, is a great initiative to also upskill the marginalized, not only by the narratives but also by learning, documenting. By emphasizing lived experiences, these platforms challenge the existing hierarchies in media platforms too. Grassroots media collectives like Chalachitra Abhiyan encourage local communities to produce their own films and reports, which play a role in transforming the ownership of storytelling from elite institutions to them. By changing and challenging whose control the creation of stories and also at the rawness of the content, alternative media redefines how marginality is perceived by the society. Alternative and community-oriented media platforms have progressed to be a space of resistance in retaliation to exclusion by the mainstream media. By empowering marginalized communities to present themselves as they are, not polishing anything, these platforms attack the dominant savior narratives. These marginalized voices can be broadly heard without institutional restrictions or censorships, and all thanks to social media, independent documentaries and online publishing. By focusing on daily life, political statements and cultural expressions, these platforms turn the established representation of caste structure. But there are issues too with these alternative media, which include a lack of institutional support, reach and resource, still overcoming these restrictions. Their emphasis lies in enhancing the range of public discourse and questioning the reliability and validity of the representatives. Here comes the conclusion of our module. The way how caste, class and identity are portrayed through mainstream Indian media creates a stereotypical example of how this representation of power dynamics is lightly related with. Adding to this, media plays a very important role as an agent of depicting and preserving this social reality. These media representation manipulate and normalize the social structure, economic inequality and caste hierarchy. The module gives an insight on how sidelining, stereotyping and selective visibility have historically been used by the mainstream Indian media, including journalism and cinema, to exclude particular communities which belong to a lesser social status because of the power held with the upper caste and economically privileged groups. Caste oppression is usually dismissed as irrelevant, discrete, or non-existence. Here, agency is majorly found with predominant caste representative rather than disadvantages populations themselves. Even with inequality acknowledged, the evolution of regional cinema, documentary filmmaking, and alternative media channels have broadened this possibility of representation of the silent. These platforms highlight the lived experiences, resistance, and structural analysis without bias, which challenge the traditional narratives based on patriarchy and silencing. They show the representation varies not only when the themes change, but also when the agents of storytelling take turns. It can be seen economic mobility does not mean that it will be eradicate caste prejudice. It depicts that the caste and class in the media create and sustain inaccurate perceptions of particular inequality. Therefore, rather than looking at these systems as individual aspects, a close and critical study must be done to look at how they work together. The media then turns into a battlefield where social structures are contested and reproduced. For media studies as well as general social conversations about democracy, social justice and cultural power in modern India. An understanding of this process is very important. I hope this module will help you to understand the idea of caste, class and identity, media projection on issues of marginality. Thank you.